Julie, welcome to the program. Congratulations on the book. All of your hard work has really come to front and center here, because it's not an overstatement that we wouldn't be where we are in the investigation and the justice for so many women who were abused as young girls without your reporting. Manhattan attorney Jeffrey Berman famously said some excellent investigative journalism helped build the case against Epstein, obviously referring to you. When did you first realize that you needed to dig deeper into his plea deal back in 2008?
Well, I realized it in, I guess it was late 2016. I was searching for a new project, and I was thinking about doing something about sex trafficking in Florida, knowing that it is an issue here in this state. And every time I Googled sex trafficking in Florida, I saw another article about Jeffrey Epstein. And each article that I read just made me more curious than the last, because none of them really explained how someone who had committed such a serious crime had been able to get away with such a lenient sentence.
Which was when you really honed in on the prosecutor at the time, and then the appointed Secretary of Labor, Alexander Acosta, right? You expected, and this in the early days of the Trump administration, you expected that during his questioning, right, that this would have been brought up, and it wasn't.
Right. It was clear from the little bit of questioning that he got about the case that the senators that were reviewing it didn't really understand the scope of what had happened. And at that moment, I just thought of the victims who, by this time, were now grown women in their late 20s, early 30s. And I thought, I wonder what they think about this, former prosecutor who essentially let their predator off the hook, now having oversight of this agency that basically handles child labor laws and and human trafficking.
And when you tried to seek these women out, having them come forward after they saw their abuser serving only 13 months in jail, he was allowed to work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, he had access to a computer, a television. What was it that you were able to do to convince these women to come forward with their stories?
Well, for one thing, keep in mind that one of the victims I was able to interview was in prison at the time that I did my first interview with her. She was serving a 3-year sentence on a drug charge. Now, think about that. Jeffrey Epstein, who molested, we know now, hundreds of girls, got a 13-month jail sentence. And here we have this woman, Courtney Wild, who was in prison for 3 years on a drug charge, serving more time than her predator had served. So it was a difficult, that was probably the hardest part, trying to convince the women to trust me. But I was approaching it from a different angle than other journalists had done this story in the past, in that I was trying to point out all the failures of the criminal justice system and how they had really dropped the ball.
And I'm so glad, we talked about them as women now, but this all happened when they were young girls, when they were minors. And in the book, you detail, and in your investigative reporting, you detail that Epstein knew what he was doing. He obviously had a ton of money and could have hired prostitutes if that's what he wanted. But he wanted to prey on young girls, each one of them being a new girl, right, that he would want people to help him bring in. What did this do to their lives?
It just, the trauma and the shame, they were pretty young. They really first of all, they weren't really told what was going to happen. They were they were brought in under the idea that they were just being hired to give an old man a massage. Very few of them were told that they would, for example, perhaps have to take their clothes off. So they were coerced into doing this for money. Some of them were in situations where they came from very poor families. A couple of them were homeless or in foster homes. So they needed the money. And they thought, well, all I have to do is go in there and just give this old man a massage. And when they, realized what really happened, they started blaming themselves. They thought, how could I have been so stupid to do something like that? So this kind of, they just were very hard on themselves, and it caused a lot of pain in their lives.
And it just makes you wonder about all of the enablers. I mean, this couldn't have happened had it just been Jeffrey Epstein alone wanting to go and prey on young girls. He had so many people there allowing this to happen and knowing that it was happening for so many years. Your reporting really shines a light on local reporting, right? And your story is incredible in that you are a local beat reporter. You were looking to go work at the Washington Post. You had to take a pay cut. You were barely above water, paying your bills, thinking that maybe perhaps you'd have to go become a waitress again. And your story became one of the top stories covered in the nation. What does that say about the significance of local reporters like yourself, and what can we do to make sure that we are focusing on their work as well?
Well, I hope that everybody that's watching this program is subscribing to their local newspaper. I get very emotional about this because I don't think that people really understand how important local reporters and local journalism is to our country, really. These are people that live within your community, who are watching, the people that spend your tax dollars, making sure that people aren't, your government officials basically aren't stealing your money or taking advantage of you. And if we disappear, the Washington Post, the New York Times, is wonderful papers as they are, they're not going to be watching your community. They just aren't. They're national papers. So I just hope that people who are watching this understand that your local newspaper is really your lifeline, so that you understand what is happening in your schools, in your government, and even in your neighborhood.
And I think, just to piggyback on that, you probably wouldn't have been able to garner the trust of these women and be able to have them finally, so many years later, open up to you had you not been a part of their community, in a sense, and know the area and know the story so extensively as you had been covering it.
Right, and I was able to also, part of the success, I think, of this series was I was able to convince the local police chief, who by now had retired, but I was able to convince him and the lead detective, who had also retired, to tell me really what happened. And it was the first time they had ever spoken publicly about it, and their voice was almost as important as the victims' voices, because they confided in me and how these prosecutors had tried to essentially thwart their case.
Well, I don't know if justice will ever fully be served for these women, but you came close, so close, out of all of the reporters that have been covering this. You came closest to that. Thank you so much, Julie, for your reporting all of these years, and congratulations again on the book.
Thank you.